Thank you all for coming. We're very excited to see everybody here. I'm Kate Frankfurt. I am the Chief Philanthropy Officer for the Tahoe Truckee Community Foundation. And thank you for joining our Forest Futures Salon, Decreasing the Threat of the 2022 Wildfire Season. And so many of us were affected by this fire season. It was the worst on record, with 2.5 million acres burned across California. And a fire season that began 2 months earlier due to unusual drought conditions. 3 of our state's largest wildfires occurred in 2021, with the Dixie and the Caldor fires evacuating neighboring counties to us here in the North Tahoe area. So I'm sure we're all looking outside, as I saw some people commenting in the chat, and wondering when the snow will fall, what this season's snowpack will be, and knowing that snow is essential to help to ease the drought and to decrease the threat of wildfires starting as early as they did this past year. Before we get to Lisa Wallace and Jonathan Cook-Fisher and what I know will be an amazing conversation, I want to let you know a little bit about the Tahoe Truckee Community Foundation. TTCF has been around for more than 23 years. We are one of over 800 community foundations in the United States. We are a grant maker, a collaborator, a convener. We connect people and opportunities, generating resources to build a more caring, creative, and strong community. I want to take a moment to recognize we have Stacy Caldwell here tonight, our Chief Executive Officer. Annie Rosenfeld is also with us, our Chief Operating Officer. Other members of our team are here as well, Sachet Cantu, and we are about to meet Nicole Littkemuller. In addition to grant making, our local nonprofits, and providing scholarships to local students, we focus specific attention to initiatives such as family strengthening through the Community Collaborative of Tahoe Truckee, our local housing crisis through the Mountain Housing Council, and now forest health through Forest Futures. Climate-focused grant making is something that we've actually been involved with for over 10 years through our Nature Fund, and we're proud to have distributed more than $1 million to support local projects. For the past 4 years, TTCF has convened experts to deepen our own knowledge and understanding of wildfire. And we're proud to announce the launch of our Forest Futures campaign and initiative. This is a bold, entrepreneurial, and holistic impact strategy, which identifies, builds, accelerates, and scales the solutions we need to help to protect our community from catastrophic wildfire. Our Forest Futures Salons have been integral in shaping that strategy, and we're excited to launch this Wildfire 101 series as we work to build community engagement and education on this important issue. So with that, I want to introduce our moderator for the evening, Nicole Littkemuller, Program Director for Forest Futures, and Teal Brown Zimring, Senior Advisor to Forest Futures, who has been integral in the development of our strategy and our salons, and who will tonight moderate our Q&A. We are so grateful for the partnership and the expertise of this amazing team we have with us tonight. We're so grateful for all of you being here with us tonight. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nicole.
Thanks, Kate, and thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. Just a few housekeeping things before we jump into our presentations. We're going to have presentations from 2 wonderful guests tonight, and following the presentations, we will do an open question and answer session for all of the attendees. We do ask that you type your questions into the chat, and then we will work through as many of them as we can from the chat, and we will call your name when it's your turn to ask a question. We ask that you briefly give us your name and any type of affiliation you want to share, and turn on your video if you don't mind when you ask your question. And if we don't get to all of the questions that are put in the chat, we're happy to answer them via email after the session. We'll put our contact information out as well. So, we are going to respect everyone's time with our end of this session, but we are more than willing to still answer questions after this salon. With that, I will introduce our guest speakers. We have 2 wonderful guest speakers tonight from the Truckee River Watershed Council. We have Lisa Wallace, Lisa is the executive director of the Watershed Council, and prior to her position at the Watershed Council, she worked in senior leadership with several nonprofits focusing on natural resource management. During her time with the Watershed Council, Lisa has grown the organization to implement dozens of successful meadow, stream, and forest restoration projects in the Truckee River watershed. These projects directly provide local solutions to the climate crisis and the potential for wildfires, droughts, and flooding. Lisa brings extensive experience in management, stakeholder collaboration, and financing and fundraising. In her free time, she enjoys skiing, boating, biking, and hiking, and all things Truckee River. And then our second presenter tonight, we have Jonathan Cook Fisher from the Truckee Ranger District. Jonathan is the district ranger for the Truckee Ranger District on the Tahoe National Forest. Jonathan began his career as a temporary archaeologist on the Inyo National Forest, and then worked in recreation, special uses, and winter sports on the San Bernardino and Inyo National Forest, the Lake Tahoe Basin Management Unit, and temporary details with the Pacific Southwest Regional Office. Prior to joining the Tahoe National Forest, Jonathan served as National Recreation Special Uses Program Manager for the Washington, D.C. office, with a focus on modernizing, permitting, improving, outfitting, and guiding access to National Forest System lands, and collaborating with state and local government to enhance public services. Jonathan earned a BA in anthropology from UC San Diego and an MS in resource management from the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. And we're going to have both Lisa and Jonathan give updates tonight on some of the efforts that the Truckee River Watershed Council and the U.S. Forest Service Truckee Ranger District have planned or are planning for decreasing the fire threat in our region. And with that, I will hand it over to Lisa first to kick us off.
Thank you, Nicole. Okay, everybody, I'm going to go through the whole screen share rigmarole here. Nicole helped me sort this out earlier, so I think I can get it. Nicole, am I on the right view?
Yes.
Awesome, thank you. Hey, I can see that there's about 50 of us on the virtual meeting, on the call, and I know a lot of you. I don't know everybody, but I'm so happy to see the ones that I do know. And I have to do, just sorry you guys, I have to do a little bit of rearranging of my screen here. And for the ones who I don't know, I'm so happy to meet you kind of in this format, and maybe looking forward to some additional conversations in the near future. I did just want to say that the forest health assessment that I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about is a fairly complex set of data and analysis and recommendations that have come forward. And what I'm going to do in the next 10 minutes or so is really give a very broad overview, a summary of that forest health assessment. And if it turns out that there's enough interest among folks, Nicole, maybe you and I could sort something out, and we could set something up for next quarter to do a more detailed, in-depth presentation of the assessment. And the reason I'm saying that at the beginning is because of the many of you who I do know who are on the call. I know, or I suspect, that you might be interested in a pretty intensive drill down on the assessment. But with that little preamble, let me say thank you again to Nicole and to the Community Foundation for inviting me to speak at the Salon this evening. And for those of you who don't know the Watershed Council, I wanted to let you know that our mission is to bring the community together for the Truckee to restore, enhance, and protect the Truckee River watershed. And our work is in the middle Truckee River watershed. That's where the Truckee River leaves Lake Tahoe and starts to flow north and east toward the state line, along with all the tributary streams that feed the main stem of the Truckee, like Trout Creek and Prosser Creek, those that flow or feed into the main stem of the Truckee River, with all the associated land around those tributaries. The middle Truckee River watershed includes some of the most critical habitat in the Sierra Nevada. That's due to our particular forests, meadows, and wetlands. And along with that important biodiversity, our watershed also provides water supply through the Martis Valley Aquifer to residents and businesses in the watershed. And then additionally, in the Reno-Sparks metro area, they get a good portion, a substantial portion of their water supply from the Truckee River itself. The Middle Truckee River watershed includes 2 states, California, Nevada, and 4 counties, Nevada, Placer, Sierra County in California, and Washoe County in Nevada. And there are many, many agencies that are managing the public lands and the open space in our watershed. And then we all know that our watershed is home to a year-round robust recreation economy. Our work happens through 3 main strategies: restoration, policy, and engagement. And in restoration, what we're doing is working to lift ecosystem function, to restore the function of our ecosystems, to be able to address the past 150 years or so of historic land use impacts. In our policy work, we're protecting what is functioning now so that our watershed, our land, and our water are better able to address impacts from fire, from drought, from climate change, and in some cases from current land use. Our third strategy is engagement. We're really leveraging and bringing together funders, partners, stakeholders, and volunteers, the combined efforts of all of us for these restoration and policy strategies. So with that little bit of background about the Truckee River Watershed Council, I'm going to transition to the forest health assessment, part of the topics of the Salon this evening. We've been working for the past 18 months with a consultant team of Vibrant Planet and 34 North, along with many, many landowners in the Middle Truckee River watershed to develop a forest health assessment. And I just wanted to take a shout out, take a minute to make a shout out to the Martis Fund for funding this work. It's been a gratifying 18 months, and all possible from the Martis Fund and from this team of folks. So what is a forest health assessment? I should start by saying we're focusing on the geography, the maps that I showed you just a couple slides ago of the Middle Truckee River watershed. And the assessment informs an inventory of existing conditions. It helps us understand the historic and current conditions for forest health and for the risk of wildfire. And it helps us prioritize forest health treatment and management across the entirety of the watershed or at a landscape scale. The scope of the assessment, as I said, is the entirety of the Middle Truckee River watershed. So that's almost 300,000 acres. And we talked a long time about what should be the scale of the assessment, because what we have been seeing is that a statewide scale of planning is too large for the data and the modeling to meaningfully inform local and regional forest health projects. It's important to do statewide level planning, but it's hard to bring that data down. It's hard to bring that data down to a watershed scale or a project specific scale. And at the other end of the continuum, where we've seen single agency planning, there are some limitations to that. It's easy to miss the opportunities for forest health treatments that can cross jurisdictional boundaries. It's easy to miss those opportunities for those treatments, and it's easy to misscale the risks, whether they're high or they're low. It's easy to misscale that risk if we're only looking landowner by landowner or agency by agency. But looking at a watershed scale, it allows the land managers to come together and organize treatments across the landscape and across those agency jurisdictions, and to be able to understand and leverage their work with other agencies, with other stakeholders. So for example, it's a way to gain efficiencies in planning and permitting forest treatment projects. One thing that I'll say now, and I'll probably bring it up a couple of times, is that the forest health assessment is not addressing or covering residential defensible space treatments or neighborhood treatments. And that's because while we certainly understand that there's more defensible space work to be done, it's understood what that work is and how that work needs to happen. The last little bit of a preamble maybe that I want to give is that the forest health assessment complements other planning that's being done for our forest. There's a lot, unfortunately, a lot of forest planning happening right now. I mentioned a couple of different scales a few minutes ago. And this forest health assessment is meant to complement those efforts, not to replace or unwind any of those other efforts. A large part of what we've been doing the past 18 months is engaged in a significant data collection effort, addressing the factors that I have up here in the bubble diagrams, and more factors beyond this. Each of these bubbles that are listed here has a complete and complex data set associated with it. That data is then modeled, and it's modeled specifically for the Middle Truckee River watershed for our geography, while using standards, for example, for fire modeling and for economic analysis. So we get the benefit of work that's been developed in other arenas, but we can make it very specific to the Middle Truckee River watershed. From that 12-month effort with our consultant team of Vibrant Planet and 34 North, and with our partners and advisors, all those folks I listed on one of the earlier slides, in November, literally just a couple of weeks ago, the assessment yielded a set of recommendations. I want to say that the assessment is still a work in process. We have about another month of formal work to do to finish the assessment. And then there's a period of a working group to actually determine how to implement and bring those recommendations forward into the community and to on the ground work. The recommendations confirm and amplify the importance of some work that is happening right now. So Jonathan Cook-Fisher is going to speak in just a couple of minutes and tell you about some of that work. So again, the forest health assessment is meant to complement work that's underway now and to amplify the importance of that work. It also identifies some projects that are not underway yet, but those, we recommend that those do get underway. And that's part of what the next set of work is over the next few months as well. So here they are. You can probably recognize this map, the outline of this map, as similar to the watercolor ones I presented earlier. And the recommendations here are these colored areas that represent 20 forest health projects, each at 2,500 acres, or a total of 50,000 acres. And again, I really I want to remind everybody that defensible space treatment is very important. It's very critical work. It's not covered in the scope of this watershed assessment. So that's why you don't see neighborhoods. You don't see Glenshire or, excuse me, the Alpine Meadows neighborhoods outlined here, because those are defensible space work. I also wanted to say that this is a first set of recommendations, and that after these areas are treated, there will be additional work that needs to be completed or treated over time. These 20 projects that are represented by the colored polygons here, these areas arose when we considered all the factors that were in that bubble diagram that I had in the slide previously. Things like the fire dynamics, fire history, forest resiliency, biodiversity, water supply. So you'll notice here that there's a concentration of projects in the 89 South corridor and the northwest part of the watershed. Generally speaking, these areas have high needs, for example, in the wildland urban interface, where our forests are bumping up against our neighborhoods and our infrastructure, and also high needs for biodiversity protection. I mentioned a little bit about the year's worth of data collection and modeling that we went through. When we ran significant numbers of scenarios with that data and through the different modeling efforts, these areas consistently rose to the top, even when we manipulated the different factors or the different variables in the modeling. You'll also notice that there are no projects kind of in the middle of the watershed. And this is due in large part to previous treatments that have taken place and or a lower, not low risk or no risk, but a lower set of risks. I also want to say that prior to this assessment being started, several of the 20 recommended projects were already underway with planning and or implementation. And we want to recognize and applaud the many years of work and continuous effort that many agencies have been involved in. There's many of these folks who are on the call this evening. Many of these agencies to reduce the wildfire risk within our watershed and to improve the ecological health and conditions in the watershed. And again, the point of the watershed assessment is to reinforce that work and help us gain efficiencies in implementation and understand where there might be additional work that we want to focus on in the next couple of years. The suite of projects that are here, the 20 projects at about 2,500 acres each, lets us achieve 40% of the landscape scale benefits by treating about 16% of the watershed, or that 50,000 acres. So for treating 50,000 acres, we're achieving a substantial portion of the benefit of forest health treatments. Here's a snapshot of the work that we've done to date on the assessment. And that last line, 2021 to 2025, holds several years of work, summarized kind of in one bullet, in one line there. And I mentioned that we just received the recommendations and presented the recommendations to our partner group just a couple of weeks ago. And this Monday coming up, December 6th, we have our first working group session. And that is where we'll start to fill in the detailed schedules for planning and implementation of projects that are not already underway. And I want to emphasize that we'll be starting to fill that in. You can all imagine that organizing across the 300,000 acre watershed, across the many landowners, will take a little bit of time. It won't take years and years, but it will take a few months to get that organized. One of the other findings from the forest health assessment is the relative risk in the middle Truckee River watershed is lower than some other areas of the state. But there is risk in our watershed. There is risk in the middle Truckee River watershed for the scale of wildfire that we don't want to see here. That risk is manageable and it's addressable for us. It's achievable for us to be able to reduce the risk. And I just want to close, I just want to close by saying that a lot of work has been completed in the middle Truckee River watershed in the past. And there is work underway right now that's related to planning and implementation, treatments that, again, Jonathan Cook-Fisher will talk a little bit about. But beyond the Forest Service, other agencies also have quite a bit of work planned and underway. We really want to acknowledge the importance of that and really want to make sure that we're communicating that the forest health assessment is meant to amplify and complement that work. I want to, again, thank our funder, the Martis Fund, for helping us to do this work over the past 18 months, and also the consultant team of Vibrant Planet and 34 North, and the many, many landowners and partners and reviewers that we've been working with. And with that, I think, Nicole, do I turn it back over to you?
Yeah, I think so. Thanks so much, Lisa. It's really exciting to see this assessment come out and the holistic assessment that you guys have almost completed, nearly completed. And it's really exciting to see what our region and the watershed is going to be able to do with that information to really try to catalyze prioritization of projects. So thank you so much. And with that, we're going to move on to allow Jonathan to give us an overview of some of the Forest Service upcoming efforts to decrease the threat of fire. Go ahead, Jonathan. Oh, one other thing I'll add, sorry, real quick before Jonathan starts, is if for attendees, participants, if questions come up in your mind during the presentation, you can put them in the chat as we go. You don't have to wait till afterwards to put them in the chat, and that way we have them already recorded and we can be ready to go once we get to the question session. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Okay, thank you so much. And thanks, Lisa, for kicking things off. It's great that so many of you have joined us this evening. Thanks for your time. This is a hugely important issue. Obviously, what we saw last year continues to be on all of our minds. And your question to me as a government official might be, well, what have you learned and what are you doing so that this doesn't happen again or impact the community that we unfortunately saw impact so many communities last summer? And I hope that from this presentation and our discussion, I can answer at least a few of those questions and get a sense from you if I'm missing anything, because this is also an opportunity for me to check my blind spots, check our blind spots as an organization. And so your comments and feedback are truly valuable. I'll start off by saying, introducing myself. Again, I know many of you, but I'm Jonathan Cook Fisher. I've been the district ranger here since 2019. Joanne Rabique, who I think actually joined us this evening, she was the long-standing district ranger here and did a wonderful job for many, many years. But it's been a joy to join the team in the Tahoe. I do have quite a bit of experience in this area and certainly in the state of California. And it's great to be here. There's a wonderful sense of partnerships and organizations all pushing in the same direction to achieve multiple benefits. Before I actually get into this a little bit, I want to amplify something that Lisa raised, which is I'm going to talk a lot about sort of larger scale projects, but there could be nothing more important than you as a private landowner. If you own a home that abuts the National Forest and you would like to do some work onto the forest behind your property, I can approve that very quickly. I can approve by letter you to go about 150 feet into the National Forest and do some level of fuels reduction. And I like to mention that on every presentation to the community because that, again, is just such important work. I would also like to propose that if you have neighbors that perhaps are elderly or second homeowners, there's nothing preventing you from approaching me more as a group or a neighborhood and suggesting, hey, we'd like to pool our resources and do this more as a collective. So if you find yourself kind of through this presentation thinking that's something you might be interested in, I do have my email at the end of this and would love to get in touch with you. So with that being said, Truckee. We really work in three key buckets in terms of our veg management program. First, we have a wildland urban interface program, which I'm going to get into in more detail, but it now covers approximately 3,000 acre chunks at a time. These are projects that are built around communities to address immediate threat and community defense. I'm going to get a little bit, let me move on to landscape restoration. These are some of our larger projects. They have multiple benefits associated with them. Often they involve habitat improvement, watershed improvement. Maybe we address other issues such as road and drainage, things of that nature. And then our third major bucket is utility work. I won't get into utility work necessarily tonight, but just to give you an example, Kinder Morgan Petroleum Pipeline. Next year, we're looking to work with them to clear approximately 12 miles of pipeline through the district, and that's clearing hazardous trees and fuels around that pipeline. Liberty Energy has more than 20 miles of power lines that we'll be doing some analysis and coordination on. So working with utilities is a major aspect of work, but just for the sake of time, we won't really get into it. I paused there on wildland urban interface because, so infrastructure. The infrastructure bill's been in the news a lot lately, and mostly just around the dollar amounts associated with it. But what's so exciting to me, working in the Forest Service, is the infrastructure bill didn't just come with funding, it came with new authorities. And one of the newest authorities that we now have is a new categorical exclusion that allows for fuel breaks up to 1,000 feet in width, up to 3,000 acres, located within the WUI or public drinking water sources. Now that's really relevant to Truckee, right? Because Prosser, Stampede, Boca, all public water sources. We have lots of wildland urban interface. So this new statutory authority is available for our use immediately. And for those of you maybe who haven't caught up on NEPA, a categorical exclusion is really important because it represents that lowest level of environmental analysis necessary and documentation in order for us to proceed with the project. It doesn't exclude if we have extraordinary circumstances. So we're still doing surveys, and this area is rich in its history. It's rich in its prehistory. And certainly we have a number of iconic threatened endangered species from Lahontan cutthroat trout, spotted owl. So we're still looking and managing for those resources, but this allows us to proceed very quickly. Now, I recognize that one of the weaknesses in the Forest Service is that how we get to a project, we don't have city council meetings. We don't have planning meetings where folks can weigh in regularly on ideas and concepts. And so what I wanted to present to you is once the infrastructure bill was signed in, the staff here immediately got into, okay, we have a new authority, where do we use this? And so we've been developing a number of conceptual projects with the goal of being, how do we get to these very quickly? How do we enable our partners to implement in the near term? So 2 examples would be Alder Creek and Prosser North is what they're being called now. And again, these are concepts. And what I like about these salons is that I know that this group of individuals are pretty savvy and that sharing this information, I think I can do so in a way that's outside of NEPA and it's more conversational. These are concepts though, they don't represent a proposed action. But the idea here would be these 2 colors represent 2 separate projects, approximately 3,000 acres, with the goal of how do we use existing data sets so that we can get our partners to start work in these areas immediately, like spring, summer of 2022. That's our goal right now on the Truckee Ranger District. Another example would be Alpine Meadows. Lisa just shared with us that Highway 89 corridor, right, is really ripe for treatment. It needs it. And so a project like this would align not just with that watershed assessment, but could build on some other efforts I'll get into here in a minute. And so again, this represents this is actually less than 3,000 acres. This is only close to 1,000 acres, but it's buffered to 1,000 feet off roads and private property. The new statutory authority in the infrastructure bill, how do we get our partners to implement this as soon as possible? Those are the challenges that we're dealing with right now and opportunities. Now, landscape restoration, I mentioned, these are large multi-component forest restoration efforts. These are some of our larger projects. In the past, you may have been familiar with North Alder. It's approximately 800 acres that's just south of Sage Hen Creek, north of the town of Truckee. Ladybug was our newest decision that was signed last year, and that was 2,000 acres sort of northeast of that Stampede Reservoir. You may remember again on Lisa's map, there's a couple different polygons, and so we had some alignment there with that modeling and what we were already thinking. And then we continued with our prescribed fire underburning. That's the existing workload. Those are projects that are ongoing. Now, the new projects in which we've initiated NEPA, 5 Creeks represents the most iconic. That's 6,200 acres entirely along that 89 corridor. So where a good chunk of those projects that Lisa just described, this EA is going after that large landscape. Why we're so excited about it is that when you think of 5 Creeks and then you think of the Lake Tahoe West collaborative planning effort, we're now talking about the potential of a very large piece of land here, public lands extending from North Lake all the way to Truckee that have received some level of treatment. So 5 Creeks represents a very important project to us. Van Norden is a meadow restoration project up at Donner Summit. Now, you wouldn't normally expect a meadow restoration project to be brought up in the context of a fuels management discussion like tonight, but one of the things I said is we are learning that meadow restoration projects have some important impacts on fire behavior. And I'll show you a couple examples from the Dixie Fire and the Loyalton Fire in just a minute. But let me dive into 5 Creeks a little bit more, in part because we just ended scoping and that we're going to be really pushing this project forward here in the next 2 to 3 months, hopefully. So 5 Creeks, the 89 corridor, which you can see on the southern portion of this map. This map is the fire history of the Truckee Ranger District. And you'll notice that along the 89 corridor, we have no recorded history of fire. And so we have got this huge landscape in which fire has been excluded. It's completely overgrown. This is a key evacuation route for North Lake, for Tahoe, Olympic Valley, Alpine Meadows. This is critical species habitat. We have California spotted owl packs. We have goshawk, Lahontan cutthroat trout, critical habitat. We have key recreation infrastructure, and of course the Truckee River watershed. But I wanted to key in on this fire history because I think it points an important fact that we're trying to address here, which is this is the landscape in and around Truckee that is absolutely ripe for catastrophic wildland fire, the kind of fire that can threaten communities. And so that's why on this map, you have the fire history on the left, you have our proposed units on the right. We're going after this in its entirety. So these are all the proposed units, approximately 6,200 acres, covers both sides of 89. We do have access issues on the east side of the river. And so right now the project isn't as large as perhaps we would normally like. And we're going to continue to fine tune that based on some comments we've recently received. But you can kind of get a sense for this is what we're looking to achieve and the reason behind it. Now I mentioned Van Norden Meadow earlier, and so this is a 600-acre meadow restoration project up at Donner. It is not within the Truckee River watershed. However, it's very important. It will affect fire behavior, and the reason for that is, so this is an example from the Loyalton fire. This is where you have a meadow, and where that water is present across that meadow, you can see how it affects fire behavior. And so places like this, they can either directly slow down that fire, they can be used as staging, they can be used as location to put resources and crews and tie into it to create additional fire line. And then this is another example just from the Dixie fire, in which this meadow, this wet ecosystem was able to help form a line that stopped the fire advancing. So while we don't normally think of meadow restoration projects as being necessarily fuels or fire related, they do have an important point, and we're really proud to point that out. Looking at the time here, I am going to say thank you and end it with a picture of our spotted owls. And so this is a picture of mom feeding her young last year just south of the Big Jackie's project. And I raise it because, or I show it here because it demonstrates that when we do these planning efforts, we really are thinking about the multiple benefits that we can provide. And we believe that our projects are providing not just for community protection, but the long-term viability of species like this. So thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's really exciting to see just the natural collaboration between what the assessment put out and what the Truckee Ranger District already had planned and is planning, and that, you know, there's so much in synchronicity already between what we, you know, hope to get out of the assessment and what many of the practitioners are already doing. So with that, we did get quite a few questions in the chat during the presentations. And so I'm going to just jump right into handing it over to Teal to moderate our question and answer session. She, again, if you have more questions, please put them in the chat and Teal will just start running through them. And if she calls on you to ask your question again, we ask that you just give us your name, brief, you know, where you're from or what you do, whatever you want to share with us in terms of why you're here. And then also if you're willing to turn on your video and unmute yourself, that would be great. And with that, Teal, why don't you take us into the question and answer session?
Sounds great. Thank you, Nicole. Jonathan, Lisa, thank you so much. What a pleasure. And we did get a lot of questions, which is a fantastic sign and indication both of the interest, and there's a huge diversity in the questions. Carrie Timmer, you had a question that related specifically to last fire season and how that may or may not have affected some of the plans leading into this fire season. That's a great place to start to put us in context. If you still have that question, it'd be great to hear it.
Hey, thanks, Teal. Yeah, so I was just having this conversation today, in fact, with the American River District Ranger, Mary Grimm, about some of the work that we're doing on French Meadows. And just wondering, you know, for us at least, our plan was developed, our treatment plan was developed like 3 or 4 years ago. And so we're wondering with, you know, based on lessons potentially learned from the fire behavior this year, the Dixie fire and the Calder fire that, you know, jumped the natural fire break that I, at least, and everybody I know thought would be inviolate, that being the Sierra Crest. You know, what are these changing conditions, probably based on climate change, what does that mean for us going forward? How do we adaptively manage as we're going forward? And I thought since the Truckee River assessment was more recent, that maybe you guys might have given some thought to that.
I think, Carrie, so a lot of those, and I'm sure Jonathan also has some comments, so we'll, hopefully Teal will be cool with that. So the very specific lessons from Caldor, Dixie, and other fires, right? Those are still coming forward. And so I'm gonna have kind of a multi-part answer. And so what we do have as a commitment with regard to the forest health assessment is as new treatment effects and new techniques and new approaches are developed, to incorporate those into the part of the forest health assessment that addresses treatment recommendations. So we have the ability, we have enough, I'll talk about it in this way, we have enough capacity and enough funding to keep updating the forest health assessment to reflect that. The second part I think that I would say is you saw in the forest health assessment and echoed by Jonathan's presentation, a key area of prioritization is the Highway 89 corridor. And that was going to be an area of importance no matter how the Caldor fire responded, right? But we see, particularly based on some of the, sorry, I have a train going by, we see based on some of the specific dynamics that happened with the Caldor fire, the importance of that 89 corridor.
More than cool with it, Jonathan. You're on deck.
It's a great question. I'm going to answer it two different ways. First is that South Lake Tahoe was very likely saved, not just because of the heroic efforts of the actual suppression units that were on scene, but because there had been so many veg management, WUI projects implemented adjacent to town. And so we need to keep going in that vein. And so that's why in our program of work, you're seeing both landscape level commitment and also what are these large WUI projects, these wildland urban phase projects that we need to get going, or at least do re-entry on here in Truckee. And so, yes, we're seeing fires burning more intensely, making runs and spotting with just vast amounts of energy and distances. And so sometimes the only way we can fight a fire is around the community. We call it, we're on point defense, is that we probably can't go indirect. We can't put a line out in the forest. We're gonna have to go adjacent to town and just look to save it. So the WUI treatments absolutely continue to ramp up, and that's why I kind of spent some time there with that infrastructure bill. Second thing is that I'm gonna go back to this viability of species thing. I mean, we're seeing fires burning so intently that part of our proposal in Five Creeks is that we want to do a project-specific forest plan amendment that allows us to go in and treat mechanically these protected activity centers for the California spotted owl. We feel that is necessary in order to actually provide that species a chance for long-term viability in this area.
Thank you both so much. Carrie Kreitz, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. You had a question regarding something that other people might also have, which clarifies both Jonathan and Lisa some of the answers you actually just gave now, which is with regard to the definition of treatment. And so, Carrie, if you're still here, if you still have that question, go ahead and unmute yourself, please. Excuse me.
Yeah, hi. I'm not sure if my mic's working. My computer mic is not. Okay, excellent. Yeah, it's been answered over time with everybody, but I was just specifically looking to make sure when we're talking about treatments being fuel reduction and not some other type of treatment that affects the watershed.
Thank you so much. Another question actually just came in with regard to treatment. So we'll return to you in a moment. I have a kind of broader question that came in as well, which I'm going to ask. With regard to both Lisa and Jonathan, as you look forward into this winter into the spring, the fall. You mentioned a little bit the timelines, Jonathan, in particular of some of your projects. What could stop the plan as it stands? What could get in the way? Is there anything, whether that's the weather conditions, the fact that there is not snow on the ground, or some other influence that could in any way hinder the progress of the plan that you've just laid out as we look toward 2022? And I guess we'll go to Jonathan first for that one.
Sure, happy to. Man, how do I answer this? So, I mean, talk about Five Creeks as an example. The vast majority of comment letters we received were in support of what we were proposing at Five Creeks. But I'll be honest with you all that we still have a number of groups that are questioning some of the treatments that we're proposing in places like our protected activity centers. They're questioning sort of what remaining trees are allowed to remain on the ground. And so they're raising some very important points, but some of which I don't believe are valid anymore with climate change and what we're seeing with fire behavior. Unfortunately, it will slow us down, and we're going to have to address each one of those through very detailed sort of, a science-based approach, documenting the data that we're using and the rationale. So we will continue to receive pushback on what we're proposing to do across this landscape, regardless of the fact that, we lost most of the Plumas National Forest this year. We lost a large portion of the Mendocino National Forest last year. We lost a large portion of the El Dorado. For some, that is just not resonating as reason enough to modify existing plans and go after a more aggressive treatment. That's just one aspect. Another, of course, is that regardless of how much money's out there, there's a limited number of contractors, there's a limited number of mills, there's limited ways by which we can dispose of all this material. And let's be honest, just because we have one new categorical exclusion doesn't mean there's a whole litany of other laws that we need to satisfy before we can actually implement this project. So those are just a couple things that come to mind. But I promise you all that the staff here, we are remaining positive and focused with the dedication of getting these signed decisions out as soon as we can.
Teal, if I could add just a little bit. So, it's of course, a very serious question about a very serious situation that we're in. And Jonathan answered some from the point of view of what could hinder implementation. I can talk a little bit about how we may be able to catalyze some of the planning. One of the things that we've been able to do with this forest health assessments, and there are other analysis and other planning documents that are forthcoming that can also help, is to help us more quickly, more efficiently, and more comprehensively address the range of demands put on our forest system. So Jonathan was talking about some aspects of biodiversity and where some folks have some concerns about our preservation and support of biodiversity, while at the same time, simultaneously, we're wanting to protect our communities, create fire safe and fire adapted communities. And with some of the kinds of tools that Vibrant Planet and 34 North helped us develop, we hopefully can, again, increase the efficiency or the speed of the analysis that's being done, but also the depth and the comprehensive of that analysis. And I bring that up, that's not going to have an impact on 2022, but it potentially helps us in 2023 and 2024, where there can be more confidence by the range of stakeholders in the actions that are the actions or the treatments that are being approved and put forward.
Thank you so much. Both thinking about catalyzing what it is that we can do to move more swiftly toward the implementation you laid out, and really, Lisa, remarkable to see 20 projects that are so clear and have those that map in such a really interesting way, and to think about what we can do to make that happen in a timeline that decreases risk more effectively, more swiftly. And Jonathan, thinking about implementation, it's interesting because I had thought in some way you might mention the drought or the snow season. Perhaps that doesn't affect the ability to move forward with some of these plans for the coming year. So that was interesting as well. And speaking of the snow season, we have a question, Ash, which you mentioned is a kind of silly question, but if you're still interested to ask, I think it's an interesting one. Are you here to go ahead and turn on your video?
Yeah, hi, I'm here. Thanks so much for having me. Thank you both for your presentations. They were both wonderful, and all of these efforts I think are super important. I was just wondering, as I just cut down my holiday tree after getting a permit and seeing lots of other folks, if there's any impact of holiday tree harvesting on thinning, and if so, if that could be kind of directed to particular high priority areas.
Sure, fair question. Good to see you, Ash. Quite honestly, the Christmas tree program, it is fun and we love supporting it. It has very limited applicability in terms of how it modifies fuel. Maybe if we continue this over the course of 10 or 20 years and by that time, 20, 30, 40,000 seedlings have been cut down, maybe we're looking at something, but the need is so great that I think we've got to continue to plan in these other veins. Our Christmas tree program is mostly built on accessibility and what we foresee as being probably more, folks are more likely to be successful.
Cool, thank you.
Thanks so much, Ash. Joanne, such a pleasure to have you here. You had a question as well. Would you like to jump in?
Thanks, Teal. As I hear Lisa and Jonathan talking about protecting biodiversity, and to be fair, I believe that is possible with high quality planning, which I think is what we're all attempting to do here locally. Do they see the planning that's going on helping to protect communities, forests, and biodiversity? Because the fires that we've seen the last couple of years have been so impactful that all of those things appear to be significantly affected. And I'm hoping that they believe that the planning that they're engaged in can help protect or minimize the impacts of wildfire on all of those resources.
Yeah, I teed up that question. Thanks, Joanne, for asking. Well, I mean, the answer is yes. I mean, we feel very strongly here that what we are planning for provides multiple benefits. Where we are unable to provide multiple benefits because perhaps there's a singular need. I mean, some of these WUI projects, some of the fire modeling would suggest that the threat is so real and it's so imminent that, okay, this is an area in which we're going to do a heavy cut. And I did notice a comment here about, some of these WUIs being concerned about taking too many trees. We benefit here in Truckee tremendously in that most of our WUI contains very to little to no critical endangered species or historic or prehistoric resources. And so we are capable to implement some very intensive treatments within those areas, I think, to satisfy or to address that fire risk, but also doing so, allowing for sort of us to maintain that cultural and natural history that we're all proud of.
Yeah, thank you, Joanne. Great answer, Jonathan. And I would really support that this type of planning that we're talking about, the multi-benefit and it being done in depth and with good data, that has been a goal for many, 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 many years for agencies like the Forest Service, state parks, et cetera. But it's been difficult to achieve the data collection and the data analysis to get there in all situations. And that's maybe one of the benefits of this particular point in time. Data is more available to us and more tools to be able to work with it and tying that more efficiently into planning processes. I mean, it's easy to sound like this is going to fix all our problems. Of course it's not, but there are continual improvements and we're embracing them. I know the Forest Service is also embracing them.
Thank you both so much. A few questions coming in now, so we might do a bit of a rapid fire round. First, let's go to Bob Hambrecht. You had a question a little while back.
Thanks, Teal. I guess I'll just be real quick. I appreciate the landscape scale work and how important it is. But Lisa, you were saying that you're not dealing with the defensible space in the WUI. And I live at Donner Summit, where the Van Norden Meadow is super important. But there's the land trust, there's the HOAs, there's the ski areas, and I believe there's sort of a need for sort of an intermediate level of planning. There's, hey, you walk around an HOA and get everybody to create defendable space. You do the big landscape. I would love to see stuff done at sort of a community level. It's the old urban planner in me. I think of community planning work. And is that something that's getting done? Am I right in thinking there's a gap there that needs to be filled? I mean, I could be wrong. I'm more than open to it being told that it's being managed, but it seems like there's sort of something in the.
I'm gonna try my best to be rapid fire and then hand the baton to Jonathan.
Big question.
Rapid fire, yeah. So I think this is a great question, and this is maybe where we talk about the difference between an assessment,
right,
helping us analyze and assess and recommend at a landscape scale, and then when we implement, right? And implementation will happen in smaller chunks, to your point. And what we're really hoping, the assessment does address WUI, just to be really clear on that, as well as some intermediate zone between WUI and defensible space, as well as wildlands. What we're hoping is that we can bring together that exact variety, Bob, that you mentioned, that exact variety of landowners to collaborate together. That old term, one site, do it right.
Right.
Jonathan?
My immediate challenge would be, I'd love to see a proposal come from Donner Summit saying, hey, we've organized ourselves as a community, and we'd like to do some limbing and small diameter tree removal out to 150 feet per your presentation here on December 1st. And I can get a letter back out, and we can get going on that. And then the next step would be that, let's start thinking about what that out year planning looks like at a community level.
Yeah.
Right. I'll work on that.
More for you to do.
Yes, of course.
There are two questions that are a little bit in a similar vein, so perhaps we'll take both and then have you answer both, Lisa and Jonathan. Lucy Blake and Carrie Timmer. Lucy, perhaps we'll go to you first. And well, actually, Carrie, your question kind of leads into Lucy's. So Carrie, why don't you go ahead and ask yours, and then Lucy will go to you. And my apologies for not reminding us sooner. If you would tell us your name and affiliation as you ask your question. I am privileged to know many of you, but we don't know all of each other. So that would be helpful. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Teal. I'm Carrie Timmer. I am the Regional Forest Health Coordinator for Placer County, a relatively new position the county created about 7 months ago. So my question, and I saw Lucy's too, which is definitely related, is just trying to determine, given the restrictions that we have on the ability to remove materials, given our lack of bills and other uses or markets for this excess material, how much benefit is there really in the forest thinning? If the material stays in the forest as either chips or in piles or on log decks, as opposed to the standing trees. And, in other words, is the work still valuable? And I have my own personal belief, of course, but this is a question that has been coming up over the past couple of years, given our infrastructure difficulties.
Yeah, you bet. Good question. Short answer is yes. So the piles modify fire behavior as well that facilitate immediate community defense. And so we've got a number of examples throughout the state of California where that is true. I wish I had that document I can send out, but we regularly, whenever we have a fire that goes through a treatment area, we go back in and try to document how was the treatment effective and in what ways. And so that we are starting to develop a library for that. And so even if we can't get the material out immediately, it's still valuable to manipulate that in some way to facilitate firefighting. And to the mill issue, yes, and we need a solution to mill capacity in California. I think we're all aware of that.
So I'll just jump in on the labor part of that, because I don't think we could go around and around, spend the whole hour on biomass, so we won't do that. But on the labor question, it does seem to me there's a credible labor shortage and also even RPS, registered foresters to do the work, but then people to get the work done on the ground. And I'm just wondering, Jonathan, whether you're seeing any change in that over the last couple of years. It seems to me that so many people are using the same forester and that going after the same equipment, and it seems like it's going to be a problem as we try to gear up.
I mean, it's kind of like mills. Yeah, there's more and more people looking to do this type of work, both on private lands, county lands, national forest system lands. So it can get competitive. We've been very lucky here on the Tahoe National Forest, in part because of our partnerships, and we're willing to kind of develop funding mechanisms to make sure that we rise to the top in some cases. But to your point, it can be challenging. I have seen, though, industry respond somewhat. We are starting to get I get requests all the time to meet from sort of some new businesses that are starting to be developed around this. And so hopefully with what they see as more predictable funding for the next 5 to 10 years, and this work really being forest management there's very few things that are maybe bipartisan anymore in this country, but maybe we can take some solace in the fact that veg management right now, managing the national forest, has seemed to gain a lot of traction across the political spectrum. And so I think industry is going to respond, but it's going to take some time.
Sorry, Teal, I failed to introduce myself. Lucy Blake from the Northern Sierra Partnership.
I just would offer again, at the risk of being, not responding with the seriousness of the intent, just in the last 30 days, the Watershed Council has been contacted by 2 large firms who've done some work, and they're looking to expand their business portfolio, and they wanted to have a discussion with us about it. So just as a small example of what Jonathan's talking about. And again, not that it's going to offset the severity of the problems that you're talking about, Lucy, but maybe some cause for some optimism.
Thank you both so much. And we had one question come in that we'll use as our last question for today, and then over to you, Kate, following that. To shift us away from the thinning work and restorative thinning, let's talk for just a moment about prescribed burns. What role do they play? What's the process right now, planning to de-risk for the 2022 fire season? Would love to hear a comment from both of you in regard to Stacy Caldwell's question about the role of prescribed burns in the title of our conversation today, de-risking the 2022 fire season.
Maybe I'll just quickly say one thing, and then Jonathan can have the last words. In the forest health assessment, part of course what we have to do is address types of treatments for different types or features of a landscape. And we did include controlled burns as a definite part of the response, in addition to other treatment techniques. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, prescribed fire. So obviously the Sierra Nevada forests have evolved with fire. They need fire. Numerous species require fire. They respond well to fire. Prescribed fire is the way to go. It's a cheaper option. It's just that we've got to get the forest back into a condition that will be receptive to fire in such a manner that it won't then get out of prescription and then threaten communities. That's our big challenge. For 2022, we have an eye on, Big Jack East, hugely successful. There's probably some folks on the line here that were involved intimately with that planning and really led that thing out. It was a privilege to take it across the finish line here, but that was a multi-year, multi-individual effort. But there's one last phase to go, which is, hey, we need to reintroduce fire to Big Jack East. That's going to be a big planning effort for us. Some of the questions that we're asking ourselves is, how might we manage that differently? What would it look like to bring on, as an example, just an idea? What would it look like to bring on an incident management team to actually manage the prescribed fire adjacent to the community in a place like Big Jack East? What would it be? Would the community be more responsive and accepted of the smoke impacts if we did a larger footprint over a shorter period of time, right? The idea is that if you get enough heat generated, you can really get that smoke up and out of the area so that it's hopefully not settling into the community over many, many weeks. But that's going to look scary. If you remember back, it was it last year or the year before? They all blur at this point, but We had burned off approximately 20 acres within Big Jack East, and that put up quite a plume. And it was scary for a lot of folks. We've got, almost 1,800 acres of prescribed fire we want to do in there. And so what's it going to look like if we were to burn off 100 acres or 200 acres? So it's going to require a lot of communication. It's something we need to do. And the planning for it is really starting to kick off now.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Lisa. So much depth and breadth of conversation. To sum it up for us and to thank you more formally, and Nicole as well. Kate, let's go back to you.
Sorry there, guys. Thank you so much, Teal, and thank you so much, Lisa and Jonathan. That was a fascinating discussion, and I think all of these discussions just spur more and more questions and the desire to have the next discussion. So thank you, everybody here, for joining us, and I do hope that you will join us for what will be our next discussion. We're still putting the finishing touches on exactly what we will be focusing on and who our speakers will be, but it will be on Wednesday, January 26th. For the next Salon, and we hope that you will join us for that one as well. We will be putting a survey in the chat, and we hope that you'll send us your thoughts if you have an idea for what the next topic might be and speakers that you would like to hear from. Please let us know. We're always interested in hearing from you and making sure that these salons are as valuable to you as they possibly can be. So we hope to see you on January 26th. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking time out of your day. Thank you to our presenters, to Nicole, to Teal, and to everybody for spending some time with us today. Thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.